Hello. It is 12:10 in the afternoon, so it's kind of early. Um it's Sunday and I've been really thinking about kind of everything that's kind of gone on, my experiences over the past couple weeks, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that I think I need to actually really work on sorting like my entire structure of like existing, if that makes sense. Um, so I figure I should just record what I'm doing instead of doing the thought processes in my head, recording it, and then just seeing what happens. So yeah, I guess that's the main reason I don't know how long this recording is going to be. So I guess, if you clicked on this already, it's either really long or really short or whatever. So, okay. So, where do I start? Um, like fundamentally, let me pull you guys a little closer. I got paper, but I don't know if I'm going to use it or not. So we'll see. I probably will at some point. But for now, pull you guys a little bit closer. Okay. So, okay, fundamentally, why am I here? Well, back when I started this kind of little journey, um, I felt, I don't know, Italy just kept showing up. And so I felt like I should come to Italy. Um, okay. On a deeper level, what do I feel like I'm missing right now? Trying to be completely honest with myself. Because at the end of the day, like, if you're not honest with yourself, then you can't really like progress. So you have to be like really raw and honest with what you see. So I think um, the things that I feel are lacking, I'm gonna just kind of write them down. Um, okay, so I want to change before I write these down. I want to kind of change the way I'm perceiving it instead of it being lack because the mindset I don't want to be in a mindset of lack when I'm working through this. Uh, so instead of lack, what's a better way of hmm. So like I'll give you an example. I'm not using an exact example of like something for me specifically, but I'm thinking about this in terms of if you say I lack agency, then when you're looking at that and you're looking at ways to increase agency, like that can be helpful, but the problem is um, you're kind of passing off the buck to something else and saying, well, the agency is with something else, and so that's why I am lacking, which fundamentally is not true. So with like agency, you do have full agency over yourself. And this extends to how you feel, and in turn, the actions you take and all of that stuff. Now, obviously, there are consequences to actions. So if you rob a bank and then you go to prison, you might think, well, my agency is reduced. I've kind of done this argument before, but like the general consensus is that I've come up with is like, okay, you have full agency within the system that you're currently in. And that comes from within, not external. And so I think that's the important distinction. I'm not talking about being the game master of reality, which you are, but like that's a different thing. Instead, it's more like you have the choice on how you internally process what is happening. So it's kind of like if you, on a fundamental level, I'm talking to you guys right now. It's my choice to continue talking. I can choose to not talk. And if I stop talking, okay, I stop talking, right? And no one can force me to speak. They can try and convince me, but no one can force me. And what I speak is still my choice. Even if there could be reasons that could compel me to say certain things or act certain ways. But fundamentally, you make choices on your actions. Like me waving my hands, I don't have to wave my hands. I like doing it, and that's why I wave my hands, right? I can choose not to. Um, I think at a very basic level, understanding that you have full agency is like the foundation of everything. Because if you hand your agency to someone else or something else, it's almost like you're running away from the responsibility. Because we are responsible for the actions we take. Every single one. And that is a hard pill to swallow for people who think that the external world is causing them suffering. Because it's not. It's you causing your own suffering. So, because like here, I'll break down the chain here, because that's a hard-hitting statement there. And I understand that probably people who don't believe that would immediately react like, no, that's not true. And I'll explain why it is true. Someone does something to you, or something happens. So, an example: I'm currently in Italy. Let's say Italy has an earthquake happen. Like, obviously, I didn't cause the earthquake to happen. So it's really easy to say, oh my gosh, the earthquake happened to me. Therefore, I had no control over the earthquake. Which, relatively speaking, that's true. But it's not. The agency you have has nothing to do with the earthquake. What it has to do with is, number one, all the steps leading up to the earthquake, everything you've done up to the earthquake, were all your decisions. And then everything you do during the earthquake are your decisions. And then everything you do after the earthquake are your decisions. And so experiencing an event, in this case, it's an event that we don't necessarily want to be in. But regardless, it's an event, right? And so when you it's like, okay, it's kind of like, this is going to sound like I'm victim blaming, just to be clear. And I'm aware that people will misconstrue it this way. That's not where I'm going with this. But I'm just forewarning, like, I'm aware that it can be taken this way. For someone who, such as myself, who chose to come to Italy, or people who chose to stay in Italy and live in Italy. Maybe they've grown up there their whole life. Maybe they've only lived there for a couple of years, or here, rather, for a couple of years. But these are choices. And there are advantages and disadvantages to making this decision. And you may think, well, it's not my choice where I was born. I could argue that in my kind of spirituality model that I've kind of created, I feel like we choose where we go. But assuming that that's not the case, it's true that we don't choose the external reality. What we choose is how we react and how we interact with the reality we're in. And so, sure, you were born with parents that you didn't choose, for all intents and purposes, right? We're saying that you didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose to exist. You do exist. And aside from that, you also didn't choose where you want to live. You didn't choose the environment that you're raised in. All of these things we'll say are just true for this instance, okay? Even with all of those things being the case, as soon as you have the awareness that you have full choice in how you internally interact with the scenario you're in, and how you can make choices to actively change the environment you do live in, you do have full agency. The things you have to do to get to the places you want to be may not be what you want to do. They may be too high a price to get to the place. But there is a path for you. Even if it's a shit path that you're like, I don't want to do that path. You're making the choice that staying where you're currently at is better than taking the alternative path that you've seen. That's an active choice. People might think, well, I like the place I live in, and I've decided to stay all my life, and they're like 70 years old, and they're living in the same place that they lived in when they were a child. That's a choice. At any point in time, they could have chosen to go somewhere else. They chose not to. And fundamentally, it's not about resources. It's not about the difficulty. When we choose to do something, if it matters enough, you will go through any difficulty to get there. It just didn't matter enough for you to make that effort. And that is really tough to reconcile with, because it is a hard truth that you are making decisions on a moment-to-moment basis that are reflecting your reality. So because of that, and because you do have agency, you can't make excuses that it's someone else's fault. It's like purely, I am here in Italy because of my actions. That's it. I'm like, honestly, like, I've had a lot of great experiences, but I'm also like, I feel internally like discombobulated. That's why I'm doing this, right? To try and like sort it out, because I realize the kind of major flaw that exists in my current state of existing, which is that anchored presence that is unchangeable regardless of environment. I haven't really anchored it in the way I thought I did. So, yeah. But anyway, we'll get to that in a second. So, getting back to this, the truth of the matter is that no one can force you to do anything. No one can force you to think a certain way. You have full, complete control to make decisions. The thing is, the decisions we tend to make are decisions that are around cost benefit analysis of like, logical thinking, like, I live in a good environment, and the unknown environment that I could be living in, it could be greater, but it could be lesser. So because of that, I've decided to pick the environment I know rather than to go into the unknown for potential higher, better environments, because there's also the potential for lower, worse environments. And so when you realize that this is a choice you're making consistently, and it doesn't have to be conscious. a lot of times we make these things unconsciously because we don't really give ourselves enough time to really sit down and allow ourselves to like let the unconscious and the conscious kind of like interact and see like what's there. So also it's like it's kind of like it's almost like the contracts, the terms and conditions for using a service. Inevitably, if we want to use the service, we're kind of forced into accepting the agreement. We were never actually forced. What it is we value using the service over the perceived slight of this contract that we're agreeing. Because there's no other option, it's you either use the service and then agree, or you don't use the service, right? You can't not agree and then still use the service. And so, just like with these kind of service agreements, we make agreements to stay in the place that we stay in. Maybe we think about it every so often where it's like, yeah, it'd be nice to move. I kind of hate that the summers are really hot here and blah, 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 whatever, right? Whatever it is. Or, oh, I hate that there's snow. I don't like that, maybe it's a roommate issue. Maybe it's a work issue. There's all sorts of things where it's like we're not happy with things that are going on. But because there's this perceived idea that, well, we don't really have a choice. You do, but you don't feel like you have a choice because the other options don't feel appealing. You make the choice to basically stay in the situation. And so this is why inevitably, if you really question yourself on a deep level, you will find that there isn't an external factor forcing you to do something. There's coercion where it's like, hey, there's a really good benefit to doing this option. And maybe you're like, I don't know, but like you get convinced and then you do the option anyway. Even though you maybe you didn't want to do the option, but you're coerced into it for whatever reason. But you can always choose not to be coerced. The consequences for being super stubborn and not being coerced could be really high. It depends on what it is that you're being coerced into doing, right? I think about the idea of like people who get captured in war and get tortured. Or whatever it is, right? They have the choice to not say anything and not give up intelligence. Or they could lie, or they could do whatever, right? But obviously, if they choose not to say anything or choose to give false information, like they could have some serious things happen to them that they may not want to experience, right? So it's like, even in a scenario that's that dire, they still have a choice. It's not a great choice. There isn't really like a good choice there to make, but it's still a choice. And I think this is where the idea that we can't make decisions and we can't choose, and that we give our agency to someone else, it just all breaks down when you realize that regardless of the situation, it still holds. Not making a decision is a decision. So, um, that's kind of so, like, fundamentally, the base building block for kind of existing is that you have full agency. Okay. I'm just putting a little box, and I wrote full agency on it. Fundamental. Okay. So we got full agency. That also means that you can kind of trace back to why you're in a situation. And again, this is where the victim blaming, you could totally say this is victim blaming. I get it. It's not what it is. It's just more of awareness rather than saying you're the reason. But I will give you a scenario. I had that incident where, I was in Rome and Rome. I was next to the Colosseum, and those guys came up, or the guy came up, and ended up giving him 60 euros, right? I had a lot of choices there. In the moment, I chose that as the option because there were outcomes that I didn't necessarily want to entertain. So that was the choice I made. Some people may have chosen totally differently. However, in the very first moment that person walked up to me and started talking to me, I could have chosen to not talk to the person. I could have said, "Oh no, not interested," and kept walking. That's very possible. I could have done that. I chose to be kind instead of buffering off the person to interact with them. Because to me, I value being kind to whoever comes up. Even if there's a possibility of getting scammed, even if there's a possibility of them asking something of me, it's kind of like that's something that I chose in the moment. And the outcome, obviously, is that I allowed myself to get scammed. Because at any point, I could have just walked away. I could have thrown the stuff on the ground and been like, not interested, and taken them off of the wrist and just been like, nope, I'm not paying for this, and then walk away. However, I didn't. I didn't do that, and instead, I gave them money instead. Now, this is where it's like, okay, well, you're effectively victim blaming yourself because they were kind of like looking for prey. They came up to you. they did the scam, and shouldn't you be upset or angry or frustrated about this thing that happened? It's like, yeah, I could, but like, why would I be angry at my own decisions? And this is where fundamentally it's like I'm taking accountability for the fact that I could have done things differently. Now, in the moment, I may not have thought of all the possible things I could have done. And so, in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do what I did, which is why I did what I did. So, I'm not trying to um, do the 2020 vision thing of saying, oh, well, if you're like in a fight and you get like absolutely destroyed, you're like, oh, well, if I put my hand like this and then like this and then like this, I could have completely blocked all of the attacks. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't, right? Um, so I'm not saying I need to like rewrite the whole encounter, right? What I am saying is I went with a course of action that made the most sense to me in the moment, and that was the outcome. If I don't want to experience something like that in the future, I can choose different decisions earlier in that decision tree to cut off that possibility. So that's where I say I could have walked away from the onset of this person interacting, pretend that I can't understand him, whatever, right? And I probably would have avoided the whole thing. Um, so does that mean that they have zero accountability? Of course not. Just as I have full agency, they have full agency too. And the things that they're doing are, you know, obviously scummy, right? But just because something else outside of me has full agency as well doesn't mean I have to take that into account when looking at my own accountability. And so that's where there's a distinction where both can be simultaneously true. I obviously am not, I am in the victim set of this thing that happened by being approached and scammed, but I also allowed it to happen because of the actions I took. And in the moment, I decided that was the best course of action. But it doesn't remove the scammers like accountability for what they've done on their side, right? It just means that from my perspective, I know where the cutoff is. When it comes to my actions, I can change my actions in totally different ways. But I can never change their actions. I can try and convince them. I can try and, I could go down there and I could try and look for them and be like, hey, you know what you did was really wrong? And try to give them wisdom and all of this stuff. They have free will. They can choose to listen. Maybe they really like heartfelt, like, oh my gosh, you're totally right. Or they're just like, you're an idiot, and then they try to scam me again, right? So like that's where the fact that every single interaction you have, there's your accountability for the situation, and then there's whoever else's accountability. And Also understanding, again, splitting it past this, it's like, does them doing that scam immediately make them evil people or assholes or whatever? I mean, some would say yes, some would say no, some would say, oh, they're just trying to support their family. Some would say, they're scamming millions of people, and so, like, fuck them, you know. But like, at the end of the day, you can decide how you view them. And this is where my kind of structure around viewing other people and other scenarios is, you have the action and then you have the person. And I've talked about this before. So I think the next thing is, aside from full agency, there's this divide between people and actions. Sorry, I'm just writing this down. Okay. So everyone has full agency. And then in that same token, you have full agency on how you see someone. And I'm going to put full agency how you perceive people. And for that matter, it's not just people, it's everything. But, when it comes to interpersonal relationships, you have full agency on how you view the person. You also have full agency on whether you want to interact with them or not, right? You might feel like you're forced to interact with them because of a certain situation, but that's not true. There are many ways to not interact with a person that you're kind of in a situation, or maybe you're working together or whatever. You've just chosen not to take those actions because maybe the consequences of doing that are severe, or it's going to make the workplace awkward, or whatever, right? Or maybe it's a roommate situation, yada, yada, yada. Okay, I'm going to pause real quick. My feet are getting cold, so I'm going to put shoes on because I think it's my feet transferring the heat down into the wood. Because I have socks on, but they're not helping. So I'm going to pause. Where's the pause button? What? I swear there was a pause button. I don't see it. Okay, well, I'll just stop it and then start it again. So, okay, I'll see you in a second. Okay, I'm back. Okay. So full agency, I think, is like super crucial. What is it crucial for? Well, this is the framework that I've built for myself. So I'm kind of uncovering the framework that I function. And I think it's important to understand that just as we have full agency, you also have full agency over the fundamental structures that make up who you are. And I'll get to that in a second. That's a whole other side thing on constructs, but like full agency extends to this, where you have, I'll give you a really simple example, and then I'll help extrapolate it to everything. So you're living in a house with a roommate. Let's say it's just you and the other person. And they tell you every morning at 7 a.m., I'm going to wake up and I'm going to make coffee, and then I'm going to take a shower, and then I'm going to go to work. So I'm going to be using the shower during that time. And so over time, you've kind of agreed to this structure of in the morning, if you happen to wake up at around that same time, they're going to be using the coffee pot or the coffee grinder or whatever it is, and they're going to be using the shower. Now, let's say you only have one shower and you only have one coffee grinder. Well, on the days that you decide you want to get up at that time, there's kind of a conflict there. Now, you can choose to wake up earlier and then take a shower there, or you can choose just not to take a shower, or you can say, fuck you, I'm going to take a shower. Now, obviously, they all have different consequences and outcomes. You can also choose to like talk to the roommate and say, hey, I understand that you're doing this, but like I'd also like to like get up at a certain time and do this. So can we like figure out something that works for both of us? Whatever it is, right? There's a myriad of different choices. But fundamentally, what has happened beneath the surface is a construct has been created in your mind that you have agreed for it to be there. And that construct is subconsciously, you are aware that these things are happening in the morning, so you might plan around it in subtle, small ways. Or maybe even you don't even wake up until after they leave. It's not that you don't want to wake up earlier, but it's that your body recognizes that if you're waking up earlier, you won't be able to do the things you want to do. And so you literally don't wake up until after they leave. And you're like, wow, it works so well. I don't know why I keep waking up at this time, but everything is great. And, it works out. It's a construct in your head that's been created. And you've agreed to it, and now you're subconsciously kind of working around that construct. Things like, rules that are in the house that you and the roommate agree on. Maybe you're really anal about cleaning dishes, and the roommate is not. And you're like, hey, I want dishes clean, because it's really annoying to wake up and see that there's a pile of dishes from the morning coffee and food that you make. So if you can instead throw them in the dishwasher, and then, we'll have a system in place. So it's like, it's not a big deal. And then the roommate's like, yeah, you're right. It doesn't take too much time to throw it in the dishwasher. So I can just put them in there. And then when it's full, we can just turn it on. And again, this is something where you're setting a boundary you have, and you're saying, hey, this is how I'd like for things to happen. And then they're like, you know what? This is worth it. This is a good idea. And sure, we'll do it. We'll meet in the middle. And the reasons for the deciding on having it that way are all because, in your case, you constructed something that you felt was important to you. It's a construct, and then you presented it and said, "Hey, can we do this?" And then you both agreed, and now you both have constructs of this idea, and now you subconsciously do the things. You don't think about it, you just put the dishes in the dishwasher, and that's it. And so we do this with every single thing that we do, and things we don't do. So, another example, depending on how you grew up, the types of fundamental social rules that you've kind of constructed, they'll all vary and they'll be different. So maybe you grew up in a really strict household where you eat at the table without any distractions. That's a construct that's been implanted into your head and have had repetition happen over the years, and it's become kind of a structural, stable thing where that is just something you do. You do not think about it. You think it's super normal. That's what you do. And so understanding that every action you take, even like this, me doing the finger thing, or me talking a certain way, me looking a certain way, these are all structures that are in my head that either I consciously or subconsciously have created over time. And so when you kind of break it all down, fundamentally, we as people on a daily basis are outwardly displaying all the constructs that are in our head because we do things in a subconscious manner. And you can actively choose to rewrite those constructs. Most people don't, because number one, they don't even think about the fact that they have constructs. So, like, if you can't even recognize that there are constructs that you do, then you can't change them because you don't realize they exist. So, that's why these constructs, and again, I'm using the word construct, they can be whatever the fuck you want them to be named, right? But fundamentally, this is I'm using the term construct. So, yeah. So when you realize that every action you take is a construct, you can then start sorting what constructs are useful and beneficial to you and what constructs are not. This is also why a lot of people, when they leave their hometown and they go to a different state or a different country or a different continent, they have these like culture shock moments. What are culture shocks? It's seeing that a different culture has constructed different sets of guiding principles. And because those constructs are different, it is shocking to you because the things that you have built as normal constructs clash or are different than the constructs they have built. And at the end of the day, we can choose how much of the social constructs that exist in society we allow to exist in our head. So I'll use Japan as a really good example. In Japan, standing out and being an individual is not necessarily a good thing. Some people do it, but most people want to blend in. That's kind of just part of the cultural background that they grew up in, where people blend in, and that's a good thing. If people don't blend in, that's a bad thing. You can choose to blend in, and you can choose not to blend in, but socially, there are consequences. So some people will choose the less friction route of just staying in this blended state where they don't really have a bunch of individuality to them on the surface. They still are individual underneath, and maybe they have all sorts of cool interests, but it's a lot more subdued internally. And then outwardly, they have a very blank kind of canvas approach where they don't have anything that stands out. And every culture is different. So what am I getting at here? What's the core thing in this little nodule? It's the fact that our behaviors, all behaviors that we do, are constructs that we are subconsciously or consciously allowing to exist in our minds that then dictate what we do. So let's see. I'm just writing behavior equals constructs that can be changed. Okay. Now, why is this important to understand this? So, going back, we have full agency over ourselves. That full agency extends to, but is not limited to, how we view people, how we interact with people, so on and so forth. It also extends to the constructs that we allow to exist in our minds. You can call them behaviors, you can call them habits, you can call them techniques, whatever it is, right? But at the end of the day, I'm labeling them constructs. And because of these two, this like, it's like a pyramid where you have full agency at the top, and then you have the sub things within the pyramid of like, okay, you can deal with people in different ways. You can deal with society in different ways, all the habits, behaviors, whatever, right? Building this, we have a very basic template for existing. What does that mean? Well, if you have full agency, that means you have complete responsibility over how you act, how you respond, the things you do, the places you go, the people you interact with. If you don't want to interact with someone, you don't have to. If you want to interact with someone, you can. Now, obviously, just because you have full agency over yourself doesn't mean it extends to other people. You do not have agency over another person. You can try and convince them, you can try and collaborate with them, but at the end of the day, they have full agency just as you have full agency. And with that comes the understanding that outside of you, you can't really control what other people do. You can try and convince, persuade, but there's actually no control you can actually force someone to do. You can try and make options where it looks like there's only one option, the option you want. But again, you're kind of manipulating someone. You're not forcing them to make that decision. They still have to make the choice, even if it's lopsided in one way. If I say, I will give you $100,000 to raise your hand, well, I'm not controlling you to raise your hand. You're still making the decision. It makes sense. It's like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'd raise my hand for $100,000. That's dumb. Like, yeah, why wouldn't I? But in that instance, you're saying, I would like $100,000 more than the discomfort of raising my hand, right? It's still a choice that you're making. I'm presenting an option that's really appealing to you, so you're going to obviously do it. And that is basically manipulation 101. It's trying to get people to do things where there's an option that stands out as opposed to the other options. This is how people manipulate other people. It's like governments do it, individual people do it, groups do it. You can look at like organized religion. You can look at, all sorts of things, that all sorts of structures that we have in society. There's this like subtle manipulation going on to try and convince people to act a certain way. It's, and at the end of the day, even the ones that are like, the places that are really, really rough, where it feels like there's no choices, even those places have to convince you to act a certain way. Otherwise, like you'll be crazy, you'll do lots of stuff, and it'll be annoying for them to deal with, or whatever it is, right? Again, it depends on the situation, but you get the idea. So, so understanding the separation of where your kind of accountability ends. Now, I'm saying this from the perspective not of a legal, I'm not doing it from a legal sense. Legal is totally different, because obviously, like, if you have a child, you can't control the child, but you can try and convince them to do certain things and yada yada yada, whatever, right? And as a guardian in our society, like, if your kid does something stupid, you kind of have to take accountability for the thing that your kid did, even though technically, like, you couldn't control the kid, right? But you're not going to just like leave the kid out in the cold because they broke someone's window, right? You might like punish them or try and teach them, like, hey, this was wrong, you shouldn't have thrown a rock in their window, or hey, you should have thought about this when you were playing baseball, or whatever it is, right? But that's a bit different. So I'm not looking at it from a law perspective. That's like a whole separate thing. That doesn't really concern me when it comes to like this philosophy, right? Obviously, respect the laws of wherever you're at. I think that's important. It's kind of like the laws are an extension of the social space, where when you're in a social space, there are some sort of expected behaviors that are very basic, that we all kind of subconsciously agree to on a social level. And it differs from culture to culture. There's some very basic stuff. Like, for the most part, I can't think of, maybe some indigenous civilizations that haven't really like interacted with people outside of themselves. They may have some really crazy different ways they interact with people. But generally, if we're looking at the world that is connected as a whole, generally speaking, we've all agreed that like randomly just going up and killing someone is bad, right? Like, generally speaking, you don't do that. You understand that like socially that is unacceptable. Um, Same thing with robbing. Generally speaking, stealing someone's shit is like unacceptable. And the people who do steal stuff, it's not that they don't understand that, it's that they choose to break that norm that most people live under, right? Same thing with like, we don't randomly try and like walk in other people's houses. Um, you know, we pay for things when we go to stores. Like, there are just some basic stuff that we follow. And this is all like the social contract that we've agreed on as a society to be somewhat like stable. We don't want chaos. We don't want everyone just killing each other and taking everyone's stuff. So it's better to kind of socially agree that this is not acceptable. And depending on what things we agree on, we also have like corresponding rules, which are the laws. So it's like, that's like, that's something where it's important to understand the context of where you're at and what you socially agreed to with wherever you're at. So, an example, I'm a foreigner in Italy, right? Being a foreigner, I understand that a lot of the social customs and social perspectives that people have living here, I don't necessarily even know about that social contract stuff. I can infer from where I used to live, okay, I can generally understand that we have stores, we pay for things, and so on and so forth. I start listing the basic stuff. But inevitably, when you get down to the smaller things, like socially, it's hard to know sometimes. But just as for me, I'm kind of like socially blundering a little bit through things, people also give you a little grace for being a foreigner in a culture that isn't your own. Now, obviously, that grace doesn't extend to like being an asshole, but like, if you do a faux pas of something kind of obscure that is like, oh well, this is a thing that only happens in Rome, right? It's like most of the time you're probably not going to have a big issue as long as you're not intentionally doing it. Like if someone says, hey, just so you know, like, it's actually, that's not really something that we do, and then you correct your behavior, it's like, cool. But why am I focused on this social aspect of things? It's important, and this is kind of where full agency comes in again. It's important to understand that wherever you go, there will be a set of social kind of contracts in the space that are expected of you if you want to be harmonious in the space. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to completely change how you exist in order to bend over backwards to like fit in perfectly. That's not what I'm saying. But observing, understanding, and following the social guidelines for the space you're in allows you to be less disruptive. So this is kind of a choice that you make, is do you want to be super disruptive when you go into a new space, or do you want to conform a little bit more and shape yourself outwardly to be a bit more like fundamentally melding into the society as opposed to frictioning with it? So I'm going to put the next arrow here, and this is going to be social bubbles / contracts on how to exist inside space. Now, I know a lot of this seems kind of boring at the moment, but I'm trying to lay out the foundations first before I get into anything higher level. So basically, right now, I've covered yourself, your interactions with people, your interactions with the constructs or behaviors that you have and that other people try to give to you. And then you have the social spaces that make up and comprise a bunch of people together. This is very fundamental. And I think we obviously, again, it goes back to full agency. We have full agency on how we interact with everything. But for me specifically, the way I view how I want to interact with people, society, and like my own mind is, I'm not going to write this down. I feel that treating people with complete respect, regardless of the situation I'm in. If someone's angry or frustrated or upset, looking at their perspectives, this is kind of like, this is where I start building my own constructs on how I want to interact with people. This is why understanding these three things at a basic level, that this is the foundation for everything, means that you can construct yourself in the way that best fits you, that also connects in the way that it works for everyone, so that you're happy, they're happy. It's like a good kind of ecosystem. And again, I'm not saying lose your individuality. I'm not saying to like let people walk all over you. What I am saying is the more awareness you have towards each of these aspects, the more agency the more control you can exert over yourself to decide what you actually want to do. So, yeah, at a fundamental level, I guess this is about the control you exert on yourself. And it's I kind of view it. I'm going to use another analogy. I view it as kind of like there's the difference between you buying a car and then just using the car, occasionally changing the oil, getting it sent into the mechanic to do whatever it is, versus the car enthusiast who builds their car from scratch. Maybe they find a really cool body of an old car that they love, and then they're gonna gut it, sandpaper all of the sand down all the edges, make it look really nice, paint it the color they like, and then they may spend like 10, 15 years building this car, and everything is exactly the way they want it to be. And the moment they hop in that car, it's like, whew, they're so happy because they've custom made the car of their dreams, as opposed to buying one that's kind of close, just out of the lot. And for most people, buying the car makes more sense for them. They look at the different models that already exist, and they're like, you know what? This model looks good. I like it. It's close enough. I like this color car, so that's fine. Maybe they'll do a few little adjustments of like, I want this type of seats, or I'd like to have like this kind of like extra little bell and whistle. But like, that's kind of, when deciding to buy a car, whether it be a new car or a used car or whatever, that's kind of the decision making that most people do. And that's fine. Obviously people are running around with cars and they're driving. So like, yeah, clearly it works, but it's not the same as the enthusiast. The enthusiast dials in everything to be exactly the way they want it. And that is the difference between kind of the way I think as more of an enthusiast of the mind of like, okay, I want to have all the construct structures exactly the way I want them to be. I want to think about all the ways that I interact with people and how I'm going to approach people and all of that stuff, how I approach societies, how I do whatever. I want them dialed in exactly the way I want them to be. And some people choose to kind of just like, they grew up in a certain environment, effectively giving them the like a certain car. And think about it like maybe your parents buy you your first used car or new car, depending on, how rich you live. But like the idea is like, here's your first car. Maybe it's not exactly the one that you wanted. So you can choose to like get a different car that fits you better, or you can choose to just drive it because you know what? I mean, it's good enough. Like it drives. Yeah, maybe there's some annoying things that I don't like about it. And it's the same thing when it comes to like, effectively your environment and your parents and all of this stuff have kind of given you a pre-built set of constructs, and you can choose to just allow them to exist, and that's fine. You can also choose to change them or remove them completely. Maybe some of them just don't fit. And you're like, you know what? I don't like the fact that X happens or Y happens, whatever it is. So you go in and you change it. This is how you get into a scenario where you start doing shadow work and other stuff. other like mirror work and like, it's all effectively the same thing. It's diving internally and seeing what's there and then kind of changing it to fit more of like you. Um, so so that's kind of the reason behind why it's like this like structure is kind of like a manual to understand the very basics of how to become a an enthusiast, if you will. And for some people it's like not worth it. They don't want to do it and they're like, "Bro, I just want to like play video games and like go to my job, have a boyfriend or girlfriend and or just a significant other, and then, have a family and then live until the ripe old age of 80 or 90 or whatever it is and then, that's it. That's my life." And maybe for you that's like that's all you really care about, and so you don't need to have the enthusiast car or the enthusiast construct thing because it's like to you it's like the effort, it's like I don't really care. I don't really care about it. It doesn't really matter to me. Um and that's that and this is an important thing. That is completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no like condescension there. It's all about like it costs. There's a certain cost associated with being an enthusiast. It takes you time that maybe you're not willing to spend on it. So it's like for the enthusiast, it makes sense because that's their thing. But for a non enthusiast, it's too much time on something they don't care about. So that's where it's like, instead, it's like, well, okay, maybe you're not an enthusiast. Here's a manual of your car. You don't have to change the oil yourself. You don't have to, um, you know, change the spark plugs or, do whatever, right? But you can. And here's the manual how to. And so I think this fundamentally is what I want to teach. Okay, I got it. Okay. So I understand. I want to make a manual that allows for people to become enthusiasts if they want to, but if they choose not to, then they at least have an understanding of what you can do with the manual. And you can pick and choose, okay, it's actually not super hard to change out the seats in your car. It just takes a little time, you spend a little money, you get different seats, you swap them out, boom. It's actually super simple. But you wouldn't know how to do that if you didn't have a manual to like read that, okay, in order to do it, you do this, right? So I think that fundamentally is what I want to focus on. Okay. So let me write that down. So I'm going to make a different page for this because it's important. Okay. So what I want to teach. Um, how to identify and become informed on the mind? Sounds right. And then how to go from interested to enthusiast. I spelled that wrong, but that's okay. Level for the mind. Okay. So I've been mainly focused on the mind so far. That's not the only thing I want to like kind of work on. But this has all been focused on the mental aspect. And when you do the mental aspect, I've found the physical aspect and other aspects of you become a lot easier because it's like you have a supercomputer as opposed to a tangled mess of wires and different components that are like not really working together well. So that's why I feel transforming the mind is like super helpful because then you can be clear on transforming other things. Your mind will help you get there. Now, it's not the only path. Some people start by transforming the body, and then the body gives the mind better fuel and better efficiency. It's like updating the hardware, whereas I'm talking about updating the software, right? So, you know, yeah. And then there's also, so when it comes to the body, obviously, like, there are also tons of like fundamental stuff with the body. Some of which I understand, some of which is like, I'm obviously I haven't. I think the thing I've leveled up the most in is the mind. My body doesn't showcase my knowledge of the body. I do have a lot more knowledge than you would expect, but also it wasn't deemed my number one priority. So that's why the body has kind of declined over the years. But doesn't mean I don't think the body's important. I just, ideally you keep the body healthy and you do the mind at the same time, right? And then there's also like parallel doing that with like meditation and the soul and all of that stuff. So this is so this turns out to be mind. So when it comes to the body tells you a lot. I think a lot of times we tend to use the mind in ways that will distract ourselves from observing the stuff with the body. So I think that's like, it's kind of a whole separate thing now. So I don't know necessarily if I want to I think there are plenty of people out there that have studied the body way better than I have that can delve into that type of knowledge and understanding. So I don't think I'm gonna do anything when it comes to the body. Like, I can teach stuff, but I think refer to experts. Just as how I feel, for me, I feel like I am an expert of the mind. There are experts of the body that have spent their whole lives researching, studying, and working on their bodies. I don't think one approach is better or worse. And then there's also like the soul, which I feel like I have my highest levels in the mind. Then the soul is still something I'm working on, but it's like fundamentally I'm trying to tap in to this kind of deeper layer of the soul. And then when it comes to the body, like, I've kind of just let that run its course. Like, I've created a set of like systems that I can kind of autonomously do through the mind, where it's like I try to do small things like take the stairs or like do little extra bits of walking. I haven't been super good on like doing tons of exercise every day. I've been giving myself a lot of like extra rest and extra breaks. Um, so I haven't really made too much progress. I think the main thing is I've been really trying to figure out like what am I going to be doing like more long term. Um, and so I think when it comes to the mind, there's that. I definitely think I want to be like teaching about the mind and helping people work through the mind. Um, then there's the body. I'm just going to refer to other people on that. Now, the soul, this is where I think the mind and the soul kind of connect really closely, because when delving in the mind, eventually you will come to a point where you realize there are things in the mind that are like fixtures that you can't really change. And there's no seemingly like you don't know where these fixtures came from. They just exist. Um they always have existed for like basically since you've existed, if that makes sense. Um and when you strip yourself down to the fundamental like basic building blocks, these fixtures are like still there and you can't remove them in the same way you can remove other constructs. um and what I mean by that is, like, here's an example. No matter what I do, what I read, the way I act, all of this stuff, fundamentally, it actually, there's like a soul level like pain that I feel even on when reading fictional stuff. Um, when reading about like, you know, people or sentient life treating other people or animals or whatever like really poorly. So an example, I was just reading this the novel I'm currently reading, The Wizard Civilization, which by the way, this wizard civilization is also kind of an asshole. As a whole, they are like they expand from, I guess, universe to universe, like enslaving and going at war with everything that they find. And they see everything else as kind of resources to expand the civilization. So they're kind of what you would deem a greedy civilization. And they came across this civilization that their whole structure was like unprecedented order. And they were basically nodes. Each individual creature was like a node in this massive like network. And you could think of it as kind of like one big brain, where each is a neuron. But like basically they're all individually like they all individually exist. And the wizards basically, whenever they would kill these creatures would like teleport to like the home like area through quantum transposition, blah blah blah, whatever, right? But like they eventually found a way to brutally separate these like creatures from the hive mind. So sever the like link to all the other nodes and then kill them forever. In this like really excruciating way. And it was like really like it was hard to read. Like I don't know. I just like I felt really bad for this like fictional race that's being like effectively torture killed. Um and I don't know. It's like fundamentally that is something where like I can't change it. It's like pillar of like me where this feeling it comes from a fundamental thing of like being kind and treating people with respect and like allowing like everyone has autonomy and like again it's like all of these fundamental principles I have on like being really aware of other people to the best of my capabilities and trying to minimize my impact on other people in like a negative way or whatever. Where it's like I don't want to like disturb people if I can help it. Obviously, depending on the situation and context, like we can't perfectly make sure that we don't ruffle any feathers or whatever. But like we can minimize our impact to make sure that everyone like I, I don't know how to really describe this other than like yeah, it basically it's just like a fundamental way I view life. That's why, even though certain life is like annoying or whatever, like flies or mosquitoes or bugs or whatever. It's like even then I try really hard not to like kill them I try to take them outside if it's like spiders or whatever. Um, and then when it comes to like people, it's like, yeah, like I try to treat people with respect. I try to like, when I'm interacting with people, I may be blunt, but like that's also a form of me trying to be like show care, because if I can illuminate them to something that they may be like doing uh that they're not aware of, it's a form of helping. Now obviously there are limits. I've gone through all the stages of like, you don't actually give people unwanted advice because they don't want it, and they're not going to necessarily use it even if you give it to them. So there's kind of like a like balance that you can have with that. But like fundamentally, like that part of me has never changed. I've felt that since I was very young. Sometimes I've forgotten that that's a part of me, but even in the like really stressful periods of my life, that's always kind of existed. Um, and I mean, like, I remember the few times that I was like killing spiders back in the day, and it's like I would apologize to the spider or to the insect that I killed or whatever. It's like, I don't know, like, it's like, where did that come from? No environmental factor made me have that, and I haven't been able to like change it in any way. Um, and so fundamentally, that's a pillar. So that's where it's like explaining this. Um, you will find that there are parts of you that are never really changing. They just exist. They've always existed, and they will always continue to exist. Those are the parts of you that you can build your entire framework around. So instead of clashing with those parts of you, accepting that they exist, and then harmoniously forging your internal behaviors to match those resonant pieces of you, this is how you get like coherence and harmony across the board. So when you're doing something, it's a harmonious action where there's no friction within yourself. So, and that's why I think it's like this goes beyond just the mind. Like there's clearly, this feels like this is soul territory of like, you know, if you believe there is a soul, or if you don't believe there's a soul, that's fine. But when you recognize that there is something fundamental that like you can't really change about yourself, and it's not, so the thing is, it's not that I couldn't go against my nature of whatever it is, right? So in the instance of like killing insects, yeah, of course I've killed insects before, but it was painful to do it. Like internally, it was painful. Um, and so we can do things that are against whatever these like pillars are. But when you do that, it does inflict like internal anguish in some way. And so this is why you can have a scenario where you have people who are walking around acting, having a bunch of constructs that are totally against their innate core pillars that exist, and be incredibly unhappy. and feeling like death every day. It's because they're not following their core pillars internally. And so I think when it comes to the soul, I think I want to be able to teach how to find or okay, I'm writing this in the wrong place. So I want to do there are core pillars that have always existed and will always exist. And specifically, they're things that it's like you didn't create these things. They just have always been there. Hence why I say there's something from before your existence. Because like where do they come from? So at the very least, we could say, oh, well, maybe there's a certain gene sequence and there's a certain mind thing and there's a certain environment thing, but that's not true. They just exist irregardless of all of that. Now, are there ways to obscure them or change your behavior? Of course. Doesn't mean they're not there. It just means they're obscured. And some, it may be harder for some people to find them than others. So, I mean, it really depends on your situation. But it is my belief that everyone has these. I don't know how many each person has or the level of effect that they have on people. I don't even know if I found all of the ones that are for me. I look and I get a sense of certain ones being there. But yeah, it's I don't know. There's still more to explore. So, I'm not sure. But so on the teaching side, this is what I was going to write. How to find core pillars and how to align yourself with those pillars. Okay. Okay, so we got the pillars. What else? Again, there are certain things like intuition and following following the guidance and all of this stuff. These are more basic things that I think they are, again, the fundamentals of like that spiritual side of existence, which I think does mesh with everything else. I don't think they're all separate, but it's like when it comes to the spiritual side of things, there are plenty of teachers that are like way more suited because they're like super experts in that field, where they've delved really deeply into spirituality. That's not to say that I haven't. It's that my experiences, I think, are fundamentally there's like a certain slice that I think I'm like well versed in. And I think, that might evolve over time, but for now, I think the core pillar and then also the inner child, um, which I don't know if the core pillar is part of the soul, and or sorry, if the inner child is part of like core pillars and the mind and all of that. So I'm just going to put that as a separate thing, inner child. So when it comes to inner child, shit. Okay. I think this is healing around the inner child. So examining and healing the inner child. I think that would be like, I'm doing it a little in reverse, but I think that's what I would want to be like helping. But so, okay, the inner child, what is it fundamentally? What's the whole thing about the inner child? We all have an inner child, and I think at a fundamental level, I think the inner child is basically the purity of our existence, like the purest version of yourself. And then over time, that inner child, that purity kind of gets hurt, or things happen that kind of taint the waters a little bit, because that's just the human experience. I think about it as like a clear crystal water with little droplets of like ink floating into the water. And this ink kind of, I think about, actually, there was this, sorry, I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. There's this really cool little experiment that one of the readers that I listen to occasionally, she was talking about how, it's like, okay, she brought out a cup. I think she did water or like Sprite or something. I think specifically it was Sprite that she wanted to use as the base. But Sprite, and then, oh god, I think it was oil. And she talked about how like we start out as like a cup of Sprite that's like clear. And then over time, you pour in oil as you experience life here. And over time, it kind of covers the surface layer of the Sprite cup. And eventually, as you're kind of like working on yourself spiritually and all of this stuff, you start pouring more Sprite into the container to like flush out all of this extra like oil that's been sitting at the top layer this whole time. So it's like you're pouring into your cup, which is your vessel, whatever you want to call it. And, she did this demonstration of the oil kind of pouring to the sides and then the cup being clear again. However, the difference was she used glitter at some point to kind of showcase this, like, it was like edible food glitter or whatever, but she used it as a means to kind of show that, like, I think she used the glitter as the way to, like, make the cup overflow a little bit. I can't remember the specifics on it, but the end result was, like, basically you have this cup of Sprite or, liquid with all this glitter, like, and it's very beautiful and it's all flowing throughout the cup. And kind of the point of that exercise is to showcase that, we start out kind of as, like, this clear, like, existence, the inner child. That's how I'm using my analogy of the inner child here with this. So it's like your inner child is pure and clear, and then over time, stuff happens to like yourself, and then the inner child gets, like, polluted with all of these, like, things. It could be like, oh, you're not good enough, oh, whatever, all sorts of, like, experiences that kind of try to cover up that like purity that you have. And the glitter is, like, all of the the experiences you have that are centered around, like, exploration of the self and, like, doing, like, the inner work, the shadow work, the mirror work, the whatever, right? Working on your internal self, doing meditation, stuff like that. And eventually you kind of heal the inner child, and then because you've done that, you have this extra kind of layer because of human experience that's been, like, intermeshed with that purity you have. And so you have then this scenario where it's like, okay, you have the purity with a mix of these really cool little glittery things, and so it makes that, like, cup look even more beautiful than it initially looked, because you've had the beautiful experiences in this life to make that cup glitter and shine and have all the beautiful stuff happen. So, and then also on that same token, once you've kind of excavated and cleared out all of the, like, oil that was sitting at the top, you can immediately recognize when new oil shows up and then get rid of it, because you're like, nope, I'm not interested, because you can feel it on a fundamental level because you're very sensitive to, like, you've done all this work. So the moment that something enters your field and is trying to kind of, like, pour oil in there, you can sense it and see, like, yeah, I'm not interested in that. So yeah, okay. So I went on a side tangent, but basically the inner child I view as kind of the pure self. The pure self that is made up of all of these pillars, these core pillars. It's like the inner child is like a conglomeration of all those pillars combined into, like, that self that is the purest version of you. And I think we all have different kind of offshoots of that purity. But I think fundamentally, um, there are some foundational stuff like unconditional love, um, and curiosity for the world, for existence, and like excitement at like new experiences. These things are very like foundational that I think everyone has. And then I think there are offshoots of like things that maybe you specifically have, that it's not that other people don't have it, but it's more like this is your unique brand of you, right? Because we don't have every single child being exactly the same. If you look at like younger children, um, there's kind of there's like individuality, but fundamentally there is like some stuff that all kids share, right? So I think that's where it's like you have the inner child, and then you have like your unique signature within the inner child. Um, so I'm gonna write the inner child is purest version of self without external influence. And so so what I would like to teach in regards to that is how to identify, work with, and heal inner child. And then on a side thing, um, no, I think that's fine. And I think, oh, it's a trash can. I think on a base level, all of these things on how to, I want to make like a video series for each of them, but also um, I want to help like interacting with people on a one-to-one basis to try and help them work through different aspects of it. Because I think sometimes it's really helpful. Like on my journey throughout this, it's been very helpful to like bounce ideas back and forth with people that I trust. Um, and then later on, like now, me kind of talking to you guys about this and kind of explaining the thought process and kind of laying it all out. This process in itself was very helpful on focusing in on like, okay, what is it that I need to like, not need to, but that I want to be like focused on. So yeah, so I think offering the ability to have me hop on and chat with people, um, to help them work through or identify different things, because I've been doing this my whole life, right? So um I feel like I'm very good at doing this. So being able to show the process for them specifically and kind of working through it so that then, okay, you know, again with like the fisherman concept of like, I'm going to fish real quick, show you how to set up your line, how to put bait on the hook, how to reel in a fish, and then have you do it. So that, and maybe doing it in a way where it's like, okay, here's the first thing of like me showing you the steps, and then here's you doing it. And then kind of helping, kind of like, okay, well, why do you think this? Or why, blah, 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 whatever. So, like, it's something, I'm not sure on the specifics, but I feel like that's like fundamentally, I think that's, I think that's what I want to be like doing, if that makes sense. So I guess offering sessions on helping people who are stuck on process. And the way I kind of view it is it's like an advisory kind of / technical help where it's like the point of like booking a session is not for me to do the thing for you. It's for me to show you how to do it yourself. Where it's like, okay, we're going to work with you specifically because, like, for whatever reason, it just didn't click. And so having having it happen to you in real time, where it's like, okay, doing the shadow work in real time with the person to get to the inner child, to figure out, okay, well, where did this all come from? And then saying, well, okay, here's the root. Now, how do we change the root and heal the root so that all the other stuff goes away? And then now that you've seen how it's done, now, like, you do it and you show me how you go to the root. And then you heal it yourself. And then it's like, cool, now you've done it. Now you know how to do it. Great. Awesome. Now you can do the thing. Same thing with like constructs. Like, okay, you're struggling to build a construct. Okay, well, like, or even just identify what constructs you have. Same thing with like, what are the core pillars? Okay, well, let's talk about like, who are you? Like what, and going through the process of like kind of narrowing stuff down to figure out like, okay, well, what really is your core? And then kind of all those things combined, because individually they're all very powerful tools to help you in your life. But when all those things converge and combined, it's like you have like full understanding of like the fact that you really can do whatever you want. And there's like internal kind of guiding posts that show you the things that maybe will make you the most happy. And then you resonate with that and then you go towards it, and boom. So yeah. Okay, I think in a weird way, I think this is like exactly what I was looking for. I didn't even expect it to turn out this way, so that's fun. Cool. Okay, now I need to just think about this for a little bit. Also, I've been talking for quite a while, so I guess thanks for listening. Yeah, I'm probably just gonna leave it at this today. I mean, it's already a lot, so I guess surprise on if this is interesting. You know, I don't know. Okay, I'm just gonna go. Have a good night. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.